Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Oh, good.
Thank you so much for joining
Okay.
us today.
Oh, happy to
Oh,
do so.
all right, well, I'm going to quickly introduce you to the class. This is Dr. Hughey.
Okay.
She's an associate professor in counselor education and school counseling. And she's been a counselor and teacher educator at KSU for 30 years. So we're so excited to have her share her expertise with us. In particular, she served on the KSDE Blue Ribbon Task Force on Bullying. So she's going to tell us a little bit about that, her experiences there, and give us some insights. So thank you, Dr. Hughey.
Absolutely. Thank you for having the opportunity to visit with you about such an important topic, and one that you'll, I hope, see that I feel passionate about, primarily because of the long-term impact that bullying has on individuals throughout their life. And I bet if I ask each one of your students, if they remember a time that they felt bullied, or they remember a classmate being bullied all the way in elementary school, they remember it vividly.
Yeah.
And if they think back about the impact that that has or has on that individual today, it truly is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And that's what the research says, that bullying has a lifelong impact, negative impact on individuals. And teachers see it every day.
Mm-hmm.
And it just reinforces the fact that we have to address it. We can't, once upon a time, I know when many decades ago when I was in school, there was kind of an attitude of, well, kids will be kids, or boys will be boys, girls will be girls. And it was maybe swept under the rug a little bit. We can't allow that anymore. It's not healthy, and it has drastic and detrimental effects.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's so critical that, especially in this day and age with so much new like social media presence and technology, that kids are suffering from it even more. And that's not only inside the school, but outside the school as well.
Yes, and cyberbullying is one of the areas that the task force talked about and discussed a lot. It's absolutely much more difficult to address cyberbullying for educators. There's that. There's a line of what's free speech and what's our lane. It's trying to stay in our lane, and there is a legal right to free speech, and I'm absolutely, I'm all about that, and could rant a long time about the right to free speech. But there's a line too. You don't go into a theater and yell fire, so there's a line about free speech. And more importantly, I think for us as educators, is about teaching. And I hope if anything comes across, and as a result of the final report on from the task force, that we really try to stress the importance of education. This is about teaching our students as well as the children and adolescents that our students are going to be teaching, about the impact of bullying, how to recognize it, knowing what it is, and then how to teach that there's a better way of communication, and recognizing what's the goal behind it. How do we address it in a way that everybody learns? Because it's not just about the child who is being bullied, but it also is about the child who's doing the bullying. What's going on with that child? Because everybody needs help. And I think that's really important. It's not about punishment. And I think that's a very important message for our teachers, for your students to know. It's not about punishing the person that's doing the bullying. It's about teaching. Because so many times that individual doesn't recognize that that's what they're doing. They don't recognize the harm that could come from that. And so it's about teaching how to be respectful, how to have empathy, how to communicate with others in a way that creates a climate in a classroom where learning is advanced, where that sense of community is advanced. And that's a workplace skill. So whether you're elementary, secondary, college level, it's about creating a climate where we all feel respected. Humanity. To me, that it's about teaching those life skills.
Yeah. How do you think it's best to approach the teaching of those life skills? Because I know that we'll have future educators out there who are like, well, that's really something that needs to be taught in the home, or that's really not our job as teachers. But we know that we're with these students so much of the day and we have such an impact on them. What would your recommendations, or what did the task force find would be good things to do to really come across and teach those ideas of empathy and understanding?
Well, ideally, we'd like to say, oh, that's something that's taught in the home. We'd like to say that parents will teach that in the home and we will only teach those content areas, but we know that's not the case. And it's not that parents don't want to teach those or they are being negligent. We tend to parent as we were parented unless there's an intervention. Most 99.9% of parents are doing their dead level best. They are doing what they know to do to be good parents, but that doesn't mean that they all have the skills. And consequently, children are not learning the skills that we know are necessary to be successful in today's world. So it is up to teachers, and it's about our climate in the classroom too. And so if we want students to be academically as successful as we want them to be today, and we know they must be, we have to create that climate in the classroom. And so we cannot tolerate bullying in a classroom because it doesn't lead to good academics. We know that when students are bullied in a classroom, the academics go down. Number one, they don't want to come to school. And so they start being sick. They start having headaches. Their stomach hurts. School refusal. And in the most sad cases, we know that children die by suicide when they're bullied. And in fact, I keep a journal of all the students, all the lawsuits that have been filed because of parents claim bullying. Just in December of 2019, a case that's currently going on right now, tragic case of an elementary child who died by suicide. Parents have filed suit. The school district, the evidence would show, tried to cover up the bullying, didn't share all of the information with parents. There's video of the child being terribly harassed, physically bullied. It rips your heart to watch it.
Oh, yeah.
And I wish I could say that was an isolated incident, but time after time after time. We know that there are multiple cases in Kansas where school districts have been sued for the same thing. We've had students die by suicide in school buildings. Elementary children died by suicide in school buildings in Kansas. So it's not something that we can say, oh, that happens in other places. That doesn't happen here. That doesn't, but it does. And it happens. My counselors deal with children who want to die by suicide because of bullying in kindergarten through adulthood. And so every day, it is not an isolated incident. And schools have been mandated to address the issue. They are to have policies. They are to report. They are. But one of the issues is, as we look at how do we solve this incredibly sad problem,
Mm-hmm.
one of the issues is, what is bullying? What's the definition of bullying?
Mm-hmm.
And the task force discovered, and administrators have known this, what Kansas has in the statute doesn't, as a definition, doesn't match what research shows, as a matter of fact, is the definition of bullying. So that's a problem. When we talk about bullying, generally what research would say is it's pervasive. There's an imbalance of power. It happens over time. Mm-hmm. Knowing your school district policy is critical.
Did the task force?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was going to say, did the task force find that each school district had different policies, though, and they defined it differently?
Well, it depends on who you ask. So when Kansas has a statute, I want to be really clear that that's law. Okay?
Yeah.
So the law in Kansas says, but what administrators told us meeting after meeting after meeting is that they were so frustrated because what we believe is bullying, what we know to be truly bullying, is not what parents understand to be bullying. And so just plain peer conflict is not always bullying.
Yeah.
And so parents will call an administrator and say, Johnny is bullying my perfect Mary. And when the administrator would check into it, well, maybe that's not bullying. Maybe Johnny and perfect Mary had a difference of opinion and they both needed some conflict mediation.
Yeah.
And so just that definition of bullying needs to be clarified. And in the legislature, as we speak, they have worked to clarify that. And hopefully by the end of the session, that will be clarified. But the imbalance of power is really important. And we particularly see that with individuals who seem to have a target on their back. And again, so part of that is, as we look at, so what works? What is it that we know we must implement in schools to address the issue? Mm-hmm. And reporting is absolutely having a clear policy that everybody knows and understands. And that includes the definition.
Yeah. And
teachers model that respect for one another and making sure that that's part of it and that everybody understands that peer conflict is one thing, having respect for one another, demonstrating that, and reporting bullying when you see it.
Yes.
Going to someone, knowing who to go to. Time after time, we had students share with us their experiences of being bullied and reporting bullying and then being told, don't be a tattletale.
Yeah.
Now, I will tell you that the individuals on the task force, when they heard students say, I tried to report and the teacher told me not to be a tattletale, you could see, that didn't go well.
No.
And it shouldn't have. So teachers have to know too how to address it. If it is peer conflict, what to do. But then teachers would, share their side as well and say, I'm here to teach math, or I'm here to teach reading, or I'm here to teach whatever. I don't know. I'm scared to get into that because that's not my area. And so I think that this is an area where the school counselor, where the mental health individuals in the school and the school administrator need to do a really good job of professional development. We
Mm-hmm.
need to work with teachers and our pre-service teachers to make sure that that social emotional learning is a key part of our curriculum. And the state board has come through on that loud and clear, making social emotional learning, social emotional growth, a state board outcome.
That's great.
The legislature took up social emotional learning, took up the bullying. In fact, they had a bullying bill. And if you've not followed, which most people have not, followed the legislative session, they had a bullying bill. They have a bullying bill. And there's always a disagreement between the legislature and the state board on the Constitution in Kansas says that all education factors, anything to do with education, is the business of the state board, and the legislature is not to get involved. The legislature says, oh no, we give you money, and as long as we give you money, we will have our hand in that pot. So dyslexia and bullying were the two areas that the legislature this session are saying, you're not doing your job, and if you're not going to do your job, we are going to do your job. Oh, wow. And it has been quite the session on those two topics, because as you can imagine, parents who want to advocate for their children who have been bullied or have not been taught reading in the way they think they should have been, come before the legislature and tell these heart-wrenching stories. Yeah. And the legislature says, well, we're going to fix that. And that's what's happening right now. So the legislature took the final report of the bullying task force and looked at it, and for the most part said, oh yes, we like this, this, and this, but we're adding, we want to do this. And who knows how that is going to turn out, what's going to be funded, what's not, that you never know how that's going to end up. But there is no doubt that this topic is going to impact the role of the teacher. One way is, and this is already in the works, for pre-service teachers, like we all work with every day, like sitting in your classroom, the social emotional learning piece and how to address bullying is now a professional standard. So we at K-State and every other teacher education program must show proof to the state board that we are addressing that in a standard. Yeah. Luckily for K-State, we do that already. I started that in Ed Psych a few years ago, and you know, we do the Jason Foundation certificate. We do two other outcomes to demonstrate that, because I could see this coming. I knew this. I knew this was coming. But we are the only institution in the state. Wow. That addresses it. But the others will next year, because it's a professional standard. Yeah. So it really is something that's so very important. What, you know, even back in elementary school. So for those children, if you think about being bullied in elementary school, as adults, what impact does that have? What the research says is they don't attend post-secondary institutions at the same rate as others, as their classmates. They don't attend class reunions at the same rate. They don't have friendships and a close group at the same rate as others. I mean, it just goes on and on. Their death by suicide rate is accelerated. Yeah. It just goes on and on. And if you think about your own situation in your own life, and I would ask each one of your students to think about this. something, that was said to them, or a time that they were bullied, or they saw somebody else being bullied, how that reruns in their head over and over and over. Even when they know it wasn't true, even when, it was taken out of context, whatever the case, we as individuals tend to rerun that over and over and over.
Yeah.
And how hurtful it is. And we don't forget it unless we have an intervention that helps us forget it. And that's why that reporting piece is so very important. That's why working with a school counselor, that's why those resilience, those protective factors is so important. Those are the critical pieces. And what the research says is, in fact, having an elementary school counselor that can teach resiliency and coping, so that individuals can learn early on that, are some people going to be rude to you? Yeah, unfortunately they will. Are you going to have tough times in your life? Yeah, it stinks, but there are sometimes you're not going to do as well on a paper or on a test that you wish you did. You're not going to be as fast as somebody else. You're not going to perform as well as somebody else. That there's always going to be somebody else that you might want to compare yourself to, that's going to be, smarter, whatever that means, have the A's, whatever. But the key is learning to appreciate, knowing your own strengths, and then how to pick yourself up and say, well, okay, so maybe I didn't do as well. Maybe I flunked that, but what did I learn from it? And the only way that you can build those protective factors is to have somebody to help you learn them. And the school counselor, generally speaking, is the person with the teacher that can help students build those protective factors. Because again, it would be wonderful if parents did that, but sometimes parents don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
And sometimes parents, I know this is going to be hard for your students to believe, sometimes students don't always listen to everything their parents say. I know that's hard to believe, but on occasion, students tend to resist the words of parents, and it has more value coming from somebody else. So it's about learning early on that life is not always going to go our way, but in fact, there are strategies to pick ourselves up and say, well, okay, that wasn't how I planned it, but I can go on anyway.
Yeah.
And I think those are important skills for life.
Yeah, I think that's so critical, because I know that even, in my own situation, I experienced bullying as a child. I know my daughters had some issues with that. And it's really about, these kids are just trying to find their own identity and figure out who they are. And if they have a safe place to go, like to a teacher, to report information, to know that they're going to be listened to. That social emotional, like you said, is so critical for our students today. And even at the elementary level, there are signs of it. I mean, you can see kids either acting out, having behavioral issues. I mean, I talked to the principal at my daughter's school when she was experiencing some issues, and he said he had third graders cutting themselves. I mean, you have all sorts of implications that can be long-term if not addressed in proactive ways. And I think that's where the teachers and our future teachers that we're speaking to are going to have a powerful role. They need to create that environment that's safe for our students.
Yeah, and you said it exactly right. What a powerful role our teachers have. And sometimes I think we forget what a powerful role we can have as an educator. On occasion, I think we feel less appreciated than we should, and that maybe that is a positive that might come out of this work at home, homeschooling kind of thing that's going on. I suspect that parents will have a lot more appreciation for teachers than they did before. But students do look up to teachers, and they remember and they hear things, they read our face, they know our attitude and the nonverbal messages that we send. And I think that modeling, that mentoring role is one of the most important, if not the most important role that we have as teachers. Teaching that content is important, and that's why we're hired. We have to teach it. We have to know it. We have to know the research behind it, behind what we're teaching, and we have to teach it well. But we have to teach it in a way that sends the message that I realize that not every one of my students is going to have the passion for the same content that I do, but I still value that student as a human being. And I should treat the A student and the D or F student the same way because they're both humans.
Exactly.
And I think that whether it's the high SES or the low SES or the newcomer immigrant or the whatever, everybody has a right to be treated with the utmost respect.
Yeah.
I think that we model that every day. And what we say under our breath, our sighs, our rolling of eyes, and we've all done it. Oh, Lordy B, we've all done it at some point in our careers. Our students see and hear that. My youngest son came home one day. This is an example of what he heard, that his teacher said, "Oh, no, you didn't hear that." And Josh was like, "Oh, yes, I did." During basketball, back when they were playing the tournament, he was in, I don't know, middle school or something. The teachers had they were perhaps they were betting on what teams were going to win, the tournament, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, Josh said to one of them, "Oh, I went in on that. I'm going to, and his teacher said, oh no, we're not doing that. Oh no, that's a good." And Josh was like, "Oh no, I heard, I saw that, So they do hear. I laughed and I said, "Josh, don't mention that again. That's silly, let's not talk about that." So they do hear every little thing that is said. And I think sometimes when we think they're not listening, they are. And sometimes when we wish they were listening, they're probably not. But I always say too, to my students, stand out in the hall, stand on the playground and listen, because you can hear so much. And particularly related to bullying, you can hear the snide little remarks, or the child who has become the isolate, the who's sitting by themselves at lunch, who's in the bathroom crying. Those children need care. They need someone to advocate for them, and how to someone to teach them how to advocate for themselves. So for me, it all goes back to education. Yeah. I think that on both sides, the person who's being bullied and the person who's doing the bullying.
Yeah.
Because sadly, sometimes that's what's learned at home.
Exactly. And I think too, there's a video I show the students on this topic where it has kids talking to their parents about bullying. And one of the kids, her dad says, "I was a bully in school." And she's like really surprised by that. And she's like, "You were a bully, Daddy?" And he's like, "Yeah, I was a bully because, that's the example I saw at home. That's, I was acting out because my dad had left. And so, yeah, I was a bully." And she's like, "Wow, that's just, I can't believe that, Daddy." And he's like, "Well, that's because of the situation I was in. And we need to be aware of, like you said, the bullies have issues going on as well. So we need to try and figure out what those are, really get to know, and not assign blame or just say, oh, that kid's just a troublemaker," because they are often the ones who need the most help too. They're reaching out in the only way they know how.
They're hurting. Often they are hurting.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Definitely. I just, thinking back on my experiences, my daughter's, and then even I had the students fill out a poster or funds of knowledge at the beginning of the semester. And they all kind of talked about what they knew about the different topics we're covering. And a lot of them talked about the fact that, they were bullied in school as well, or they saw bullying, didn't really address it or stand up for it, or they themselves were the bullies. So, I think that whole process of understanding, like you said, that education and really teaching our students that not only do they need to be aware of what bullying is and understand the definition, but also be able to say something when they see it happening. Because I think we have so many bystanders because they're afraid to be the tattletale, or they're afraid to, get in trouble. But if we don't act and show our students how to act, it's not going to change.
Correct. And I think it does go back to self-esteem. So the research would show that at least 20% of our students are bullied on school property. Mm-hmm. And those, most would say that's a really low number. Mm-hmm. In Kansas, what the task force found is that 52% said they had seen 52% of sixth graders said they had seen someone bullied at school within the last 12 months.
Wow.
So yeah, that just broke our heart. Mm-hmm. But yet it was an affirmation that we must address it, because there were not 52% of interventions happening.
Yeah.
And so we have to, in fact, pull our head out of the sand and say, we know that this is going on, and act, and not be afraid to act. And part of the discussion in the task force and at the meetings that occurred from parents were things like, my child said, please don't, because that will only make it worse. We heard that many times. Administrators said there's such a fine line between what is bullying and what's not, or if it occurred off campus, how do I know what really was said? And I think that those individuals should just handle it on their own. And then we had attorneys that said, prosecuting attorneys that said, this is against the law, and you not reporting it as an offense is very problematic for you, because you're opening yourself up for lawsuits.
So even if there's off campus, they have to report.
Even on campus.
Yeah.
Yes. So, I mean, we heard all pieces of it, but it was shocking to hear how many times things happened on campus that were not reported to prosecuting attorneys or the police, that they said, this should have been reported. This should have been reported. And you are not reporting it is very problematic. Mm-hmm. That got a lot of attention, and should have, because that's why we have so many lawsuits.
Exactly.
Frankly. Because we know that if not addressed, what happens with bullying is often physical confrontation. Mm-hmm. And in Topeka, for example, just in the last few months, disastrous occurrences with bullying and children getting the fire beat out of them. And that's not the image that we want. That's not what we want happening to our children, because again, then they don't come to school.
Yeah.
And if they're not in school, they're not learning.
Exactly.
We know that out of school suspension, although there must be a time and place for it. I don't know what that is. I'm not a fan of out of school suspension. Mm-hmm. But in my opinion, I want children in school, because that's where they are the safest.
Mhm.
That even though, I mean, that's where they should be safe, that's where we have influence on them. And I just think that that is the number one solution. Have them in school and have us working with them. Because for the most part, they trust us.
Mhm.
Now, again, that's not 100%, but for the most part, we are the individuals that they trust.
Yeah.
And if we just kick them out, I don't think that's the answer.
No, you're not solving anything just by sending them home. It's not
No,
educating,
no.
it's not helping the long-term effect.
No.
So
Yeah.
what were like the main recommendations of the task force? Was it professional development? Was it a common definition? What were some of the highlights that you're hoping come out of the task force?
Better support and direction for school districts.
Mm-hmm.
Definition. Understanding what is bullying and what is not bullying, and communicating that to parents. So even administrators would say, I understand what bullying is, but parents do not. And so they would say things like, I reported it and you didn't do anything. Well, in fact, the counselor or the teacher or the administrator had addressed it, but the parent didn't believe they had addressed it to their, they didn't like how they had addressed it, perhaps. So having a policy and then communicating that well to parents. Continuing to work and develop on social emotional character development. That was big. CASEL is a wonderful resource for that. CASEL has great resources, research-based, evidence-based resources. And as I'm sure you're aware, and we say to students all the time, having research-based, evidence-based practices is critical. That was another thing that the legislature spent days talking about. What is evidence-based? There wasn't necessarily a lot of agreement on that, but CASEL is a wonderful resource for character-based education. That is going to be front and center, I think, for a lot of districts. And then looking at the law and fixing the definition was something that came through, the need to fix the statute. And then building outside of the school building, building the need for enhanced climate in the community. So with preschools, with all throughout the community, talking about a positive school climate.
Yes.
We had individuals from all different kinds of organizations visit with the task force about parental groups, not only PTAs and PTOs, but different kinds of parent groups, and the need to include them in the discussions.
Yeah.
In the bedroom, on the floor. And including them in the consequences, if you want to call them that, for bullying, so that they understand that it's not just about punishment, but it's about teaching.
Exactly.
Because some of the parents that would get really irate about you didn't take care of this problem, in fact, just needed to learn about, oh, that's why, that was your rationale. So engaging more individuals in the discussion. We talked about that a lot, particularly those with parents of minority groups. So very important. And then the need for more school counselors with the ratio of 1 to 250. A school counselor in every building, particularly elementary in Kansas. We do not have a mandate for elementary school counselors. Most states do. We don't in Kansas. More social workers, if that's needed as well. A mental health team, because again, we know that mental health, sadly, Kansas has one of the highest death by suicide rates in the country, and it's going up exponentially.
Wow.
Just heartbreaking. And so increasing the number of school counselors in school districts was one of the recommendations as well.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that will happen, but part of that problem too was the ability. There's such a shortage of school counselors.
Yeah.
So we're trying, whenever, and I frequently complain to Dr. Watson about that, Commissioner Watson, and he puts it right back on me. Well, if you produce more, we could hire more. We have that dialogue a lot, and he's right. And so we are trying to graduate more school counselors, but that is an issue. And then finally, for our pre-service, it was loud and clear. The recommendation was to make sure that our future teachers know and understand what to do with bullying, how to teach social emotional learning. Senator Baumgardner, the chair of the Education Committee, every time I do a presentation where she is present or give testimony before her committee, that's the first thing she asks. What are you doing for our future teachers? Mm-hmm. First question out of her mouth every time. And so it is important. They recognize the importance of our future teachers and want very badly to address that.
Yeah, I think that's essential. Like you said, you've done a great job in your courses trying to address that, and psych, and then I know we do it in this class as well. It's just like some of these topics are so big, it's hard to feel like we're covering them adequately in like a week and moving on to the next topic. But I think that increased awareness is critical, and getting students out there thinking, okay, we've got to look beyond the surface and really teach and address this at a deeper level. Because if our kids aren't feeling safe, aren't feeling secure, they're not going to learn the content.
Exactly. I mean, you can think back to Maslow's hierarchy. Mm-hmm. Deficiency needs and being needs. And if those deficiency needs of feeling safe, if that's not met, those being needs of academic learning aren't going to happen.
Yeah.
And, it's easy for us to talk about that and for our students to think that and write it on a test or whatever. But it's not real until they are in a classroom. And you and I realize this, until they're in a classroom and they have a child sitting in front of them who is scared for his or her own health, mm-hmm. or who thinks they're going to get ridiculed if they raise their hand and ask a question. Mm-hmm. That puts it in a whole new perspective for a new teacher.
Yeah, definitely. And there's only so much, like you said, that you can read about or talk about. You have to experience it, live it, see it. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to avoid this. When they get out into their own classrooms, they're going to see this and have to be ready to address it firsthand. But I think that increased awareness and the willingness on the part of our future teachers to say, we're going to stop it as soon as we see it and not let it go further, that's going to be paramount in making a shift, at least in the classrooms and schools they're working in.
I hope so.
Yeah. Well, you have been so amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your insight and knowledge with us.
I hope so. Anytime any of the students have a question or a concern, they have my contact information.
Yes.
Always contact me.
Perfect. I will make sure to put that in there as well so they have that. And thank you once again. Absolutely. If you want to hang on just for a second, I'm going to stop the video, but then we can chat a little bit.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.